Yes, 31st of December 2022. That's the last day of the year today, going into 2023. What are the highlights in 2022 for you? As for me, Madam Speaker Mama Zanele Sefuba, what happened? In the Free State, 2 black teenagers were refused to jump into the swimming pool just because they are black. Imagine in 2022 going to 2023. So this is what we want to discuss today in this program, the special edition, the New Year's edition. Is South Africa still a racist country in 2022 going to 2023? We are discussing the history of racism so that we should understand how did it started, when did it started, why and who started it. Yes, history is the best and most qualified to reward our research out of all the subjects we study in schools. For if you know what happened yesterday, you can intelligently discuss today and probably predict the future. Madam Speaker Zanere, I hope lessons have been learned and next time we will do things in a better way.
African Eyes strives to comply with rules of the online broadcasting regulations by providing news that is accurate, content that has been proven to be true, and programming that is fair and unbiased. If you feel like we do not comply to this, please contact us with your complaints addressed to African Eyes, 41 Horingbeck Avenue, Kulenburg Park, Randfontein, 1759, South Africa. Email us on info@africaneyes.co.za. African Eyes Radio, your revolutionary radio.
Racism in South Africa can be traced back to the earliest historical accounts of European interactions with indigenous African people along the coast of Southern Africa. It has existed throughout several countries in the history of South Africa, dating back to the Dutch colonization of Southern Africa, which started in 1652. Before universal suffrage was achieved in 1994, white South Africans, especially Afrikaners during the period of apartheid, enjoyed various legally and socially sanctioned privileges and rights which were denied to the indigenous African people. Yes, black people, if we talk about indigenous people, we are talking about native people or the real owners of the land. White people are not indigenous to any part of this earth. I can put my life on this. Examples of systematic racism over the course of South Africa's history include forced removals, racial inequality, segregation, and even resource distribution and disenfranchisement. Racial controversies and politics remain a major phenomenon in the country. This is the wake-up call on African Eyes Radio with me, the African teacher.
Find us on our social media platforms. Our handles are African Eyes Radio on Facebook. On Instagram, we are African_Eyes_media. Find us on Twitter as African Eyes MDIA. Like and share and subscribe to our African Eyes Media YouTube channel. Send us commentary via WhatsApp line 067 108 7045. Stay in touch, stay live, stay wired with African Eyes Radio, your revolutionary radio.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the history of racism in South Africa. How did it started? When did it started? Why and who started it? Driving the point home now. Colonial racism. The region that would become modern-day South Africa was located at a position of advantage for European merchants who were seeking to organize and carry out trade in the East Indies, primarily the Portuguese and the Dutch colonists. In 1962, the Dutch East Indian Company founded the Cape Colony at the Cape of Good Hope. The purpose of the colony was to ensure the Dutch ships sailing to and from Batavia would have a source of fresh provision, as death by starvation claimed a large number of passengers. During the period of Dutch rule, Dutch settlers, eventually known as the Boers, began to migrate to the colony, instituting settlements throughout the region. The region attracted Dutch slave traders who imported slaves from wheat farming and viticulture to serve the various Dutch settlements. Many Indians were brought to the colony as slaves. The Dutch colonial law defined slaves as property that could be traded, bought and sold, a form of slavery known as chattel slavery. Examples of racism and discriminatory practices during the colonial period includes whipping. Evidently, this is where the term cracker came from. A white man in the work field carrying a whip, cracking the backs of black people so that they should not stop from working. That's where the word cracker came from. Others were starvation, being forced to work for long hours, laborers having to carry passes, being subject to high taxation, not being able to walk on the sidewalks, banned from living, entering or working in certain areas such as the Orange Free State. Trust me, this state has never been black free state. It has always been, and it will always be, the Orange Free State. Yes, African Teacher on African Eyes Radio, your revolutionary radio. We are discussing the history of racism so that we should understand how did it started, when did it started, and why, and also who started it. For history is best and the most qualified to reward our research out of all the subjects that we do in schools. For if you know what happened yesterday, you can intelligently discuss today and probably predict the future. African Teacher on African Eyes Radio. This is the African Teacher. Catch me every weekday from 6 to 9 o'clock where I'll be bringing you the Wake Up Call, the morning breakfast show only on African Eyes Radio, your revolutionary radio. The Wake Up Call, building the black man up for the black woman. Did you know with derogatory connotations the word kafir was used during the period of European colonial rule until recently in the early 20th century? Right, let's talk about apartheid racism. Apartheid is an Afrikaans word meaning separateness or the state of being apart. Literally, it means apartheid. This was a system of racial segregation in South Africa enforced through registration by the National Party, NP, the governing party from 1948 to 1994. Under apartheid, the rights, associations and movements of the majority black inhabitants and other ethnic groups were curtailed and white minority rule was maintained. Apartheid was developed after World War II by the Afrikaner-dominated National Party and Broederbond organizations. The first example of apartheid legislation was the Population Registration Act. This act was the first to force citizens to be registered under their race, and this set the stage for later racial tension. One example of apartheid registration was the promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act, which was passed into law in 1959. This law resulted in forced relocation of black people, reserving much less land for the black citizens to live, despite making up a large majority of the population. Yes, in case you wonder how you managed to find yourself in the ghetto, this is how you found yourself in the ghettos. The way the South African government did this at that time was by reserving off pieces of land called Bantustans and forcing the black South Africans onto these pieces of land. There were 10 different Bantustans in total, each for separate ethnic groups. Once they moved onto these lands, the black South Africans lost their rights as South Africans and were forced to become permanent residents of the reserves. They were expected to run their own governments once they had arrived. Economic conditions on these lands were not satisfactory for the people there, as the South African government put minimal effort policy-wise into developing these regions economically. Usually residents of Bantustans would have to commute hours by bus or train to industrial zone on the border of their Bantustans. Even though the South African government spent much money towards trying to keep the Bantustans viable, the local governments were still plagued by corruption, so normal people rarely felt the effects of the government money. In the 1970s, 4 of these Bantustans became independent and separated entirely from the South African government, and this was the intent of the Bantustans: to keep all the black citizens out from South Africa. Yes, African teacher, unpacking the history of racism in South Africa. Moving forward, another example of restricting legislation is the Natives Abolition of Passes and Coordination of Documents Act of 1952. This act forced black South African citizens to carry their passbooks with them at all times. If someone was found without their passbook, they could be arrested for no reason other than that. This caused immense anger within the black community, which would eventually spark the defiance campaign of 1952. The oppressive nature of these apartheid laws sparked some resistance within the black South African community, and several oppositional groups were formed. One of these groups that emerged was the ANC, African National Congress, a group which eventually became involved in many resistance activities. The Sharpeville massacre is one of them that left 69 black South Africans killed and 180 more injured. This event resulted in the bloodiest apartheid protest that South Africa would see, and in the moment, the black South African community was horrified. Under apartheid, black women were affected to an extreme degree due to discriminatory racial and gender laws. There were not many opportunities for women to become political leaders, as many organizations allowed male membership only. So not many women did get very involved with politics. In healthy care, the government's provision of public health care was far more comprehensive in white areas, compromising the ability of black people to access such services, and a growing for-profit private health care sector among the white population further exacerbated this racial disparity. In 1987, white areas had 1 dentist per 2,000 residents, and black areas had 1 per 2 million residents. In 1990, white areas had 1 doctor per 900 residents, and black areas had 1 per 4,100. These are the actual facts. Bernata, in the New England Journal of Medicine, used 3 healthy outcome statistics to demonstrate the inequality in healthy care between white and black South Africans at the end of apartheid in 1990. The mortality rate was 7.4 per 1,000 live births among white people and 48.3 per 1,000 among black people. Infectious diseases accounted for 13% of all deaths among black people and only 2% among white people. Life expectancy at birth was 60 years and 67 years for black male infants and female infants respectively, compared to 69 years and 76 years respectively for white infants. We are discussing the history of racism so that we should understand how did it started, when did it started, and why and who started it. So looking at the past history of racism, racism was instituted by the white settlers from the day they set their foot in the African land, definitely with the intentions to suit their needs. Okay, so how is racism in this so-called post-apartheid period? Although apartheid was abolished in South Africa in 1991, racism against the people of color is still common. Let's look at the past events of racism against the black people. definition of racism, the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. In the eyes of all the races, black has always been inferior, but not in the eyes of God. Everywhere where racial dynamics exist, black is on the bottom. If you're a black lawyer amongst white lawyers, your pay will not be the same as your counterparts. On top of the hierarchy of all religions has always been white. Religion gave us a blue-eyed, blonde hair with buttermilk complexion Jesus as the Son of God, so that when we look at white people, we should think subliminally that they are direct descendants of God. Religion branded us as descendants of Ham, who was cursed in the Bible for looking at his father's nakedness. This is hardcore racism. The wake-up call on African Eyes Radio, your revolutionary radio. Yes, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. Until they are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nation. Until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes. Until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race. Until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship and the rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. This is the wisdom of the Emperor Haile Selassie I. In 2019, a University of Cape Town report by an independent commission looked into allegations that institutional practices were racist. The commission found systematic suppression of black excellence in recent years at the university. Submissions to the commission from students, staff and the public were rife with stories of better qualified black academics being passed over for employment and promotion in favor of white academics. The report concluded that racism exists at the University of Cape Town. Another incident of racism happened in Stellenbosch, whereby a group of white men allegedly verbally abused and humiliated staff at a restaurant near Stellenbosch, saying that anyone who did not speak Afrikaans is an alien in the area. Tabang Mosiago, a black athlete, had his head smashed onto a pavement at a bus stop. A black petrol attendant was attacked in an apparent racially fueled attack that was caught on camera. The incident began when the petrol attendant asked two white men not to smoke next to the petrol pump. Mr. Nathan Marureke, a 60-year-old golf instructor, was brutally attacked with a golf club in 2013, and this vicious assault left him with head injuries and fighting for his life in hospital. A 30-year-old man, Ron Rambebu, was attacked and called a K-word at a petrol station while he was sitting in his car on Kingfisher Road in Roodepoort on the West Rand. Samora Mangesi, a South African entertainment news broadcaster and presenter, came across a car accident. Mangesi inquired after the status of the passengers, to which inquiry he and his passengers were called monkeys, black bitches. A heated argument ensued and someone came up behind Mangesi and hit him on the head with an unknown object. He ended up in the hospital. The South African Human Rights Commission found a public school guilty of hate speech towards black and mixed race pupils. After an 8-month investigation, staff and the head teacher were found to have exposed pupils to dehumanizing and racist treatment. The Free State Department of Education, responsible for the school, says it will study the report and will hold its own investigation before taking any potential disciplinary action. In 2008, Johan Nair, a white man armed himself with a rifle, proceeded to go to a community of Skelrik in the Northwest Province, went on a killing spree in an informal settlement, and randomly started shooting at people and killed 3 people, severely injured 11 people, and disappeared onto a nearby farm. In January 2016, Penny Sparrow, a white woman who lived in the coastal city of Durban, compared littering black beachgoers to monkeys. Two white men, William Onthuizen and Theo Jackson, in 2016 were put behind bars for a racially motivated assault on a black man after they alleged he had trespassed. In 2019, their sentences and convictions was adjusted, finding the pair guilty of assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm and kidnapping. Jackson was also sentenced for defeating the ends of justice for burning the evidence. This, if you can remember, it was the coffin case. Vic Mombek, a white woman, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for racist remarks she made to a black police officer in Johannesburg. There are a lot of incidents that happened before, including the recent one on the Christmas Day, the day of the most important man in the Christian religion. Yes, marching orders from the African teacher. Separation is the best and the only solution to this problem. Giving them the taste of their own medicine. Separation is the only way.